I wouldn't really call it abuse in the traditional sense. It was more like psychological warfare.
Can you elaborate on that for a moment?
Okay, so for example, we lived in constant fear of accidentally biting a spoon or a fork. It got to the point where we asked Mom to puree all of our food so we wouldn't even have to use a spoon or a fork and we could eat all of our meals with a straw. It was a little awkward at first, but it was better than taking any chances, and we got used to it after a while.
That must have been hard. What did you do when you had friends over?
Well, Elliot just avoided having friends altogether because he was afraid of exposing them. It was the easiest thing to do, and I can't say I fault him for it. I was a little riskier, and I occasionally chanced it and had people over, but I did my best to conduct my sleepovers at David Simon's or Ricky Harker's house whenever possible. Man, I would even sleep at Michael Taylor's house just to avoid being at home.
Do you remember any specific moments when you did have friends over and it went sour?
Yeah, one time I remember Chris Barrett was over and we were outside playing one-on-one and he came out and asked if he could play some horse with us. I remember it was like it's yesterday. He had an H-O-R-S and Chris and I each had an H, so I guess he was panicking a little bit, and I see it now, it's like in slow motion. His back foot went up and I saw it coming. I ran for the door. He missed the layup despite the limp wrist follow through, and the game was over. Somehow he lost his footing. He began to trip. You know, the Bruce Lee sound effects only lasted a few seconds, but for a 10-year-old boy in front of his best friend, it seemed like an eternity. I vowed at that point that I was never going to risk playing basketball again if he was at home.
Can you give me some other examples?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to talk about these things. So we were never allowed to eat anything in the car that gave off any odor whatsoever. Sometimes after 5 or 6 straight hours on the road in search of a motel that he could bargain down to below $29 a night, it would become unbearable. After all, I was 8 or 9 and hadn't been allowed to eat a morsel. My only safety mechanism was to bring along a stuffed Garfield on those long trips to self-soothe.
Where'd you go on those trips?
Winnemucca. Usually Winnemucca. Then Dad heard about the 99-cent breakfast at the Circus in Reno, and we started going there instead.
It says something in your affidavit, something about a particular trauma associated with the fast food establishment Dairy Queen. Oh, okay. Can you elaborate on that?
Sorry. Yeah. It wasn't really his fault. It was like he was almost, he couldn't control himself. He promised us he wasn't going to do it, and for some reason that time I believed him, and I agreed to go along. There were probably 4 or 5 of us. It was after a YBA game. I look back and I should have known better. We walked in and we approached the counter, and I saw his eyebrows lift up and the smile begin to form in the corner of his mouth. I knew it was going to happen, and I tried to make a run for the car, but it was too late. Hey, who makes the biggest small cone around here? Once it came out, there was nothing I could do. I tried my best to pretend I didn't hear it, but Brian Band looked at me with a horrified look in his eye, and he said, "What did he say?"
What did you do then?
What could I do? I just sat there and I took it. But I swore to myself that I would never step foot in another Dairy Queen again. And, when I look back, I think it had a lot to do with my decision to become kosher when I grew older.
Was it hard for you to give up Dairy Queen at that age?
Of course it was. I was a 12-year-old boy. Not to mention, the only other ice cream we were allowed to have was the Safeway brand when it was on sale occasionally. Or for a special treat like my bar mitzvah, he took us to Thrifty for those 10-cent scoops.
You mentioned Safeway. That store came up several times in your sworn statement. What exactly transpired at Safeway?
Well, when Mom would go out sometimes and we would be alone with him. Sorry. So he'd take us to Safeway. Anyway, somehow he decided that it was cheaper to give us $2 to buy whatever we wanted than to let us, go out for a restaurant or go to dinner. So I would usually buy a family-sized pack of Red Vines, and I'd end up shaking in bed all night into the early hours in the morning.
Did you ever go out to restaurants?
Rarely. And only to the Sizzler for the all-you-can-eat salad bar, and there were a lot of restrictions.
Like what?
Well, we couldn't order any drinks, only water. Dessert was out of the question. And to make sure we got our money's worth, he would insist that we took at least 3 trips to the salad bar. You know, I look back at these moments and I'm almost positive that they all have to do with my decision to keep kosher. You know, now I drive by a Sizzler and a Dairy Queen and I know I'm safe.
Is Cragmont Cola kosher?
No.
Do you squeeze the bottle like he does to make it thinner so that it takes up less room in the fridge even though his fridge is almost completely empty?
No.
So then you seem to be making some progress toward healing. How does the trauma of your childhood affect you as a parent?
Look, you know, it's not easy for the kids or for their cousins. The silverware ban has been an adjustment basically for everybody. Elliot instituted it first and it worked for him, so I decided to do the same. Just the other day, they asked if we could go bowling, and I told them it was cheaper just to save up those old toilet paper rolls and get a tennis ball and bowl in the hallway. I mean, it's not fair to them, but what can I do? They've gotten used to my insisting that they put their cereal bowl and the cereal and the straw out at night before, before they go to bed, and I don't think they understand where that comes from. My oldest son thinks it's unfair that everyone else gets to watch kung fu movies and he can't, but I just can't take the risk of hearing anything close to a Bruce Lee sound. They don't understand why I freak out when I see a man with a perm, or when I get nervous when I hear that clicking after I put gas in the car. How should they know that I watched my father fill up a car again and again, topping off the entire tank? But I think the hardest thing for them to understand is why I insist on making collect calls home to Allie with fake names like Thatcher Holmes when I have over 6,000 rollover minutes left on my cell phone. And I explain to them there's just certain things that they're not going to understand, and they tend to give me the room that I need to heal.
Well, thanks for your time and for coming here in the middle of a blizzard.
It was my pleasure. I'm glad I could help.